Ooh, boy, this is going to take a while. MechWarrior 3 was my first computer game obsession. I found the game when I was 7. I'm 28 now. For the last 8 of those 28 years, I've been playing its ultimate successor, MechWarrior Online, from its invite-only closed beta back in 2012. I used to play MechWarrior on my dad's computer. He had the original Sidewinder force feedback joystick, and MechWarrior 3 came in the box. My love affair with MechWarrior has covered every game and expansion since MechWarrior 3, except Pirate's Moon. I still don't know how or where to get Pirate's Moon. My uncle bought all the games and packages for me from the Microsoft Employees Store, and I still have the stickers on the box sets to prove it. MechWarrior Online never had a physical release, so I'll never have a little box set for it. I do have, somewhere, the MechWarrior Online closed beta invite. I was studying abroad in Russia when I read the announcement on a netbook. It was these pictures of concept art that really stuck with me. I learned 3 things from these pictures. 1. New MechWarrior game. 2. The name Alex Iglesias. And 3. I was probably going to need to upgrade my computer. The concept art alone prompted me to sign up for a chance at that beta key. A beta I was genuinely surprised to have received. I hold very fond memories of that closed beta, but believe me when I say this, the game hasn't changed or substantially improved much since. MechWarrior Online looks substantially different from its closed beta. It went from DirectX 9 to DirectX 11. It's run on different iterations of CryEngine, and the UI has changed substantially, and for the better. The game has seen new modes, new maps, and new mechs. Lots of new mechs. Some of them even brand new. And although MechWarrior Online looks substantially different, it still doesn't play substantially different. Even after all of PGI's new mechs, maps, and 8 years of balancing passes, the game still offers the same core gameplay experience that closed beta veterans played through 8 years ago. MechWarrior Online has settled into this free-to-play arena shooter with the best MechWarrior mechanics we've seen, but very little else. PGI's ultimately been serving us a bowl of very well-crafted pasta, dry. No garnishes, no spices, no toppings, and no sauce. Any other business relying on this model would have folded. That plain pasta restaurant, for sure, would have already folded, but PGI has an ace up their sleeve. Their lead artist, Alex Iglesias. MechWarrior Online serves the finest looking bowl of plain pasta that we've ever seen. Battletech, the universe in which MechWarrior lives in, has had a wide range of mech designs and concept art. It started in the 1980s, can you tell? But some of the early battle mech designs were always good. The Atlas, the Cataphract, the Shadowcat, the Kingfisher. Others weren't always so good. Here's a collection of early humanoid mech designs that all look indistinguishable from each other. And here's what Alex Iglesias has done for them. Battletech's staple mech designs, like the Mad Cat, have always looked good, and I think Alex did a good job retaining the design's character with his modern unifying design language. Alex's work revitalized Battletech's universe. The IP finally has unified artwork to build upon. We have the same mechs in the PvP game, the MechWarrior PvE game, the turn-based strategy game, and, perhaps soon, we'll have some really gorgeous machinima. Regardless of how nice the mechs look, the team took extra care into how the mechs play, and it is better than any other MechWarrior iteration. Even if Alex's designs ended up being ugly, they'd still be fun to play with. The competent battle mech mechanics remain MechWarrior Online's other saving grace. No other MechWarrior game has gotten the function and the feel of a battle mech like PGI has. Traditionally, in the tabletop version, battle mechs functioned based on a set of rules and parameters called the paper doll. Think of it as a D&D character sheet, but for giant stompy battle mechs. The paper doll defines what engines, weapons, armor, electronics, and capabilities a mech can hold, and at what price. The largest ballistic weapon, for example, can only fit in arms if the arms don't have lower actuators, which means it can only aim up and down. The head and center torso can only hold certain weapons and equipment, usually of a smaller size. A strong bulk of the fun in MechWarrior games, really any Battletech game, is theory crafting and engineering mech builds. I spend more time theory crafting mechs on MechDB than I do playing them. That paper doll existed in previous MechWarrior titles, namely MechWarrior 2 and 3. It was entirely abusable though. Weapon placement was anywhere you wanted, sometimes even the legs. All weapons were gimbaled, so installing weapons in arms for extra control or range of motion wasn't really ever considered. There wasn't a cap to the amount of weapons you could install. As long as you had space, you could put the weapon in there. What it meant was that you could cram 12 lasers into a torso as long as you had the space in the paper doll. The mech designs themselves didn't matter in this case, only the tonnage, and you could make the exact same build in the same weight class regardless of the mech you were in. MechWarrior 4 attempted to solve this by providing incredibly specific hardpoints for the mechs, but in doing so, I think they tossed out the paper doll and a large chunk of the MechWarrior spirit with it. MechWarrior Online got it right, and oh man, did they get it right. The paper doll rules still apply, but instead of an empty design where you can cram whatever, wherever, each mech and each variant received curated weapon installation hardpoints and curated weapon location geometries. Now, you have incentives for installing certain weapons on certain mech components. Now, you had reasons to use a certain mech over another in the same weight class. Those reasons are what make MechWarrior Online's battle mechs feel unique. The Jaeger mech and Riflemen, for example, have these high-mounted arms that let you peek over hills while remaining relatively hull down. The Battlemaster has these big, bulky arms that let you soak up damage by shielding yourself. This Hunchback variant has clustered laser hardpoints on its shoulder, which means you can accurately drag concentrated laser fire with ease. Just kind of like that MechWarrior 3 example, but this mech specifically is one of the few that offers this ability and has that character. The mech design's geometry too is a huge part of these mechs' character. That Jaeger mech's high-mounted ballistic arms, they're not going to shield you from any flanking fire. The Battlemaster's meaty arm shields, well, any weapons mounted on those arms will be low to the ground and require a lot more exposure to get a shot off of. That Hunchback's shoulder laser pod, that's a big easy target to pinpoint. Some mechs are tankier by design. A Phoenix Hawk's arms are so bulky that your torso isn't generally damaged too much, which means you can more safely run an XL engine that, normally upon a side torso destruction, would mean player death. The Marauder's front profile makes it easy to hide your center torso by offering a huge side torso profile to twist into. That allows you to safely hide your damaged center torso that, upon destruction, would mean player death. They got so much right with the mech design here. Each mech and hardpoint geometry offers its own unique options that players can play with or engineer around. They also, finally, divorced torso and arm weapons. The torso weapons still converge at the range it's set on, but the arm weapons react faster to movements. A clever player could group all of their lasers in the arms with upper and lower actuators so they can more easily track lighter mechs zipping across the screens. The geometries also help balance the mechs between weight classes. Light mechs are appropriately fast and hard to hit when moving. Medium mechs are fast enough to flank and hit weak spots. Heavy mechs can do everything well, but nothing great. Assault mechs are huge, slow, and heavily armored, but also really easy to hit. In previous MechWarrior titles, the light mechs were only useful until you got your medium mechs, which were only useful until you got your heavy mechs, and all of the campaigns just ended up being assault mechs fighting other assault mechs at the end. MechWarrior Online is really good about giving each mech class a role. The assault mechs are never inherently better than a light mech, and a light mech can and often does win a duel by dancing around and backstabbing. The mech class balancing is done well because lots of the weapon balancing is done well too. Although it lacks in other areas like sound, it all works. Laser weapons in previous titles have varied widely. MechWarrior 2 lasers were projectiles with travel time. MechWarrior 3 and 4 lasers were point-and-click destruction machines. The term laser boat came about because often a high alpha, pinpoint, hit scan, laser spamming build was the meta. It was much too easy to dump tons of damage instantly with the click of a button. MechWarrior Online got lasers right. They're still hit scan, but now they have a burn time. If a large laser has, for example, 9 points of damage but 1 second of burn time, it's up to the player to ensure the laser stays on both the target and the component they're aiming for to deal the damage. You scale burn time up for longer range and stronger lasers, and you scale burn time down for shorter range and weaker lasers. Pulse lasers burn shorter and deal more damage, but they cost more, they weigh more, and they generate more heat. Lasers are the low-risk damage output option where even a poor shot equates to some damage, as long as you can manage the heat. Missile design, too, has varied. In MechWarrior 3, they were all dominating, knock you down, kill you dead options against anyone caught in the open. They were toned down in MechWarrior 4, but still generally fire and forget weapons that worked regardless of range. They too could knock down lighter mechs. While they're not as satisfying to use in MechWarrior Online, they still got it right. Long-range missiles in MechWarrior Online require a lot of planning and thinking to utilize correctly. For the benefit of indirect guided fire, you have to acquire your own light of sight and lock, or at teammates, give the missiles a clear flight path, stay out of minimum range, and hold the lock until missile connection. It's way more involved, in a good way, than LRMs in previous MechWarrior games. There's also a wide variety of electronic equipment that can help or hinder your LRM role. Sensors, laser designators, and even UAVs. There is a lot of fun team play with LRMs, and there are plenty of means and tools to defend against them. A mech with ECM can make it difficult to acquire missile lock. Mechs with AMS can shoot down incoming missiles. And, because missiles fly in swarms or clouds, players can mitigate damage by hiding components. SRMs and MRMs too function similarly, although PGI decided not to let regular SRMs have lock-on capability. Both weapon systems rely on splat damage. The most direct hits won't always concentrate all the damage to a single component. They're more risky than lasers in that you can adjust the missiles mid-flight to sneak in some damage, but they're less risky than ballistics in that they fire in one big cloud salvo and don't require aim correction. A bad shot that would miss entirely with ballistics often results in some damage with missiles. Ballistic weapon design, though, is risky. Battletech's ballistic behaviors, too, have varied. Canonically, they're usually giant autocannons that fire insane salvos of 30mm to 200mm rounds in long bursts, although some variants are just single-shot elephant guns. MechWarrior 3 had them fire salvos. MechWarrior 4 made them look like they fired salvos, but they were really single-shot hit scans that looked and sounded like salvos, but they were functionally just the same as lasers. MechWarrior Online, though, made them feel right, with one major caveat that I'll talk about later. Cannons in MechWarrior Online feel like real cannons. Here the damage output is risky. Landing a shot transfers all of the damage to a specific component, but missing a shot means no damage. Ultra autocannons offer players the chance to shoot another round in between reloads at the cost of jamming. Gauss rifles offer long range and high velocity rounds at the cost of heavy weight and charge up times. It is all really well balanced, and although I think they lack the pizzazz of other games' presentation of ballistic weapons, everything works. It's worth noting that weapon balancing has been a constant evolution. 8 years of player data and feedback have settled everything down, but for a while, concentrated PPC meta, Gauss rifle pop-tarting, and all sorts of LRM abuse popped up in response to the various balance passes. It's been a process. I'll also give PGI credit here for handling clan weapon design. In most MechWarrior games, clan weaponry is just straight up better.
This is it. This is it. The clan Gauss rifle, when you absolutely positively have to take an Atlas head clean off. I love this job.
That's kind of how it's portrayed in Battletech lore too, but I think in keeping the spirit of the game that pits Inner Sphere versus Clan still a game and not an exercise in military economics, I think PGI got it right here too. The general balancing rule is that clan weaponry is either lighter weight, longer range, or more powerful at the expense of higher heat generation or damage efficiency. Although clan lasers outrange Inner Sphere lasers, it takes much more time to deal the damage. Although clan ballistics weigh less, they fire in volleys and require more time and skill to land all of the shots on your intended target. Clan missiles weigh less and can deal some damage below minimum range, but they're streamed out instead of swarmed out. AMS systems have an easier time eating through streamed missiles than swarmed missiles, and the extra time required to stream missiles gives the receiving player more time to seek cover. Clan weapons offer more, but at the cost of damage and time efficiency. And what I like about this design is that things like the regular Inner Sphere AC-20 is still viable next to its Ultra AC-20 and Clan Ultra AC-20 cousins. One big shell of 20 damage offers something that several smaller shells that amount to 20 damage cannot. All put together, the core gameplay in MechWarrior Online is pretty and competent. This is the best that MechWarrior has had. The MechWarrior Online launch trailer, though, is ugly and deceitful. It represents everything that's wrong with MechWarrior Online. There are several points that I want to address from this trailer, but I'm going to start with the first thing that players experience booting up any MechWarrior game: the music. Butt rock. More butt rock. God, how did we get here? How did we get from spooky sci-fi electronica war drums and war horns to robot butt rock? MechWarrior 4 had rock elements, but they were better. MechWarrior soundtracks were supposed to scare you a little bit. The Battletech universe is terrifying and literally constantly at war. The soundtrack should represent that, but here it doesn't. It sounds like the beginning to a Home Depot commercial. Although MechWarrior Online finally united the franchise visually, it's clearly conducted an audible antithesis. The problem with the robot butt rock is that after a few seconds, you can mentally predict the rest of the song. That might be useful in a promo sales video where you don't want the buyer to think about the music, but it ends up adding nothing to MechWarrior Online's ambience, atmosphere, mood, vibe, however you want to call it. A MechWarrior soundtrack needs sci-fi elements and war drums. MechWarrior 3 had 2 tracks, and they both accomplished the mission of making the player feel like a mech warrior on an alien world full of potential threats. This track is full of off-sync, one-time noises that dance between your left and right stereo. You cannot predict those sounds while listening, and it overall heightens your senses in doing so. MechWarrior Online's music dulls your senses. The sound design also dulls the player's senses. Good game design gives players unique and distinct sound responses to their actions, and doesn't force the player to rely on any one sense for the supermajority of information and feedback. The Counter-Strike headshot. The Halo Shield depletion chime. A Kamehameha charge. Fights in MechWarrior Online, partly due to the 12 vs 12 match format, get very hectic, and I don't think MechWarrior Online does a good enough job of feeding the player clear and concise information. As it is, MechWarrior Online relies on the Mech computer voice, affectionately called Bitching Betty, to deliver player feedback. The MechWarrior Online Betty is clearly inspired by MechWarrior 2's Betty, and there's a reason I'm not a fan of either one.
Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
They're both too slow. MechWarrior Online's Betty's pace of speech doesn't match the fast pace of gameplay, and her enunciation is too soft and often drowned out.
Left torso critical damage. Left torso destroyed. AMS destroyed. Heatsink destroyed. Loading incoming missile. New target acquired.
Target spotted.
Heat level critical. New target acquired. Destroyed. Ultra autocannon gunner destroyed. Left arm destroyed. Ultra
Target
autocannon destroyed. Heatsink destroyed. New target acquired. Heat level critical. Center torso
Target
critical
spotted.
damage. Override
Target
shutdown.
spotted.
Heat level critical. Override.
There is a better Betty, and she's from MechWarrior 3.
Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
I love her.
Shutdown imminent. Shutdown sequence overridden.
This is the Betty I would want if I was a MechWarrior. She's quick, alert, reactive, and distinct, and that's all incredibly important in MechWarrior Online, any fighting game really. Previous MechWarrior games were slower paced, just by the nature of being a single player game, but in MechWarrior Online, lots of things happen really quickly. It's much more of a twitch shooter than MechWarrior has ever been. You can lose the right side of your mech in a few seconds, and you definitely will not remember that your paper doll had those items in those locations. Not only will it take Betty forever to read the list of destroyed items, but there's a chance you won't hear it in the first place because it's all dependent on your surroundings. Sometimes a flight of missiles will hit you before Betty even finishes her sentence.
Incoming missile.
This problem persists past poor, perceptible proclamations presented
Acquired.
by Betty. MechWarrior Online doesn't do a great job of telling you what's hitting you, either. Most ballistic hits are generic dings regardless of caliber or range, and they also sound just like some missile hits. The non-Betty related alerts aren't sufficient either. Most modern military machines make beep or boop tones to alert personnel of events, threats, etc. Stuff like radar warning locks.
Watch out, Stinger, 11 o'clock.
Certain alerts need dedicated beep and boop tones. Missile locks should give a tone so that you don't have to stare at the reticle to know you still have a lock. To be fair, MechWarrior Online gives you some tones, but they're not great. Weapon jams should definitely give you a tone. The critical damage and overheating tones, especially, aren't prominent, and they're the two notifications you'll care the most about.
Target spotted.
Critical.
Target spotted.
It's hard to hear the existing Betty and beep and boop tones, often because there's simply too much going on. Matches moved from an 8 vs 8 format to a 12 vs 12 format. Maps were enlarged and the game spawns players now in groups of 4, but it all ends up boiling down to line formation fighting. Remember that launch footage I said I would address later? Now is the time. This is all very antithetical to the established portrayal of MechWarrior. The franchise has never been about this. MechWarrior has always highlighted the smaller fights happening amongst a larger war. The MechWarrior 2 intro cinematic highlighted a small fight between two pairs of MechWarriors. There's an ambush, a duel, a headshot that all ends in a large explosion. The duel, funnily enough, is actually how lots of mech fights play out today. Torso twisting to mitigate incoming shots is MechWarrior 101.
Warning. Ammunition level critical.
The MechWarrior 3 intro cinematic highlighted a ragtag lance of Inner Sphere MechWarriors defeating a pair of presumably pristine clan heavies through creative use of the city. I mean ruins. Most cities in MechWarrior are or end up becoming ruins. Normally, those clan mechs should have won the fight. The Atlas is missing an arm, the Vulture is missing a leg and I think an arm, the two Fireflies are Fireflies. But because the Inner Sphere pilots had the space and time to be creative, they ultimately won, at the cost of several large explosions. MechWarrior 4's intro cinematic depicts some guy getting murked. Okay, so he's actually a MechWarrior buying time for, supposedly, the Dressari family to escape. The pilot knows he's in a futile fight, but he also knows he still has agency over the objective in front of him. Buy time for others to escape. The element of surprise, combined with a few alpha strikes, and he's able to substantially damage the other lance of mechs, even though he's in a 1 vs 4 situation. This should feel like this. But this feels like this. The gameplay portrayal shift is just as jarring as the music shift. In the interest of honesty and fairness, the Steam release trailer is much better and feels like a real MechWarrior intro cinematic.
Star Commander, I've lost sight of the enemy.
But the matches don't. They end up feeling like the launch trailer. In MechWarrior Online, there's a golden triangle of conditions that produce the highest quality player experience. I don't know if the triangle metaphor here is going to hold, but stay with me. The best player experience in MechWarrior Online is had when the match size has reduced to roughly 4 vs 4, there's time in the clock and space in the map, and the objective still holds influence over the player's actions. You'll know when you're in the triangle when you can recount the fight, the decisions, the mistakes, the tactics, and the story. Each of those intro cinematics fell into that golden triangle. They all featured fights of no more than 4 vs 4. Nobody was overwhelmed. They all had appropriate space and time to be creative. The Thor had that mountain to hide behind while mitigating damage. The Vulture had buildings to hide behind, and his lancemates had streets to block and stall the clanners. The other Vulture, MechWarrior likes their vultures, has debris and rubble to conceal his ambush. The objectives, too, are all driving the MechWarrior's decisions further past to kill the bad guys. The MechWarrior 2 pilot is trying to save a teammate. The MechWarrior 3 pilots are trying to hold his city and win an unfair fight. The MechWarrior 4 pilot is trying to buy time.
I'll lay them here as long as I can.
The golden triangle happens rarely in MechWarrior Online, and is because of 3 factors: the 12 vs 12 format, the map design, and the objective design. 12 vs 12 is, I think, the most detrimental factor, so I'll detail it here first. The 8 vs 8 matchmaking days were better. The worst case scenario of finding yourself up against 8 players is far less punishing than finding yourself up against 12 players. The player had more agency back then. Time to kill is, appropriately, much higher in a MechWarrior game. Tanks, turrets, VTOLs, they're all treated like trash mobs, so when I refer to time to kill, it's purely in a situation of mech versus mech. Counter-Strike players, for example, have very high player agency because of the low time to kill and the gameplay tools installed. A flashbang can disable the entire team. Nothing like that in MechWarrior exists.
Removal from the dedication from AGO. I think they'll
1 or 2 shots to the head can remove the player from the game. You can't do that in MechWarrior. Being outnumbered doesn't substantially diminish your player agency in Counter-Strike. Stories of 1 vs 5 clutching in Counter-Strike aren't all that uncommon. If you've played enough of the game, you've probably pulled off a 1 vs 5 clutch once or twice. For Honor, a medieval fighting game, shines best when you're dueling others, but the game is designed to help you when you're outnumbered. Winning those outnumbered fights, called anti-ganking, is difficult but doable, thanks to parrying and revenge mechanics granted to the player. Being outnumbered diminishes your agency, but there are tools for the players to survive. You can easily find YouTube videos of this happening, but maybe totally haven't pulled it off yourself yet.
Enter the fire with you.
I know I haven't.
Bad feeling from behind.
Duels in MechWarrior Online can be punishing. You'll always lose something even after winning a duel. Fights where you're outnumbered can be won, but often at the cost of crippling your own mech, or a teammate's. You're not really going to find highlight clips on YouTube of someone winning a 1 vs 4 in MechWarrior Online. Player versus player agency in MechWarrior is limited, and that's what makes the fights fun. 12 vs 12 strips the player of their agency. At most, a single mech can handle going up against 4 mechs. Ideally, you should really only be going up against 2 in the majority of situations. The best tactic in MechWarrior is focus firing, so when I say player agency in MechWarrior can handle 4 enemy mechs, it doesn't scale proportionally. No player in MechWarrior Online should be receiving focus fire from 4 mechs or more. Let's draw a player experience bell curve. Ideally, the majority of your fights should be a 1 vs 1, a 1 vs 2, or 2 vs 1. That's where the real enjoyment shines. That's about the limit of information a MechWarrior pilot can process. A fewer proportion of matches should be 1 vs 3, 2 vs 3, 3 vs 4, and all of their opposites. These two can be fun and deserve a place in the game, just not much as the really good 1 vs 1 and 1 vs 2 stuff. At the bottom ends of the curve are the egregiously outmatched fights, the 1 vs 4 and 1 vs 3 stuff and the respective opposites. These fights are either really hard or really easy. They're either punishment for losing poorly or rewards for winning egregiously. It takes a relatively long time to deploy agency in MechWarrior Online. Trying to leg a light mech zipping around on your screen is difficult and takes time. Trying to burn through an assault mech's torso to remove the weapons takes time. In a 4 vs 4 scenario, your time is rewarded because you affected 25% of the enemy team if you legged that light mech or burnt through the torso of that assault mech. In some cases, you might have reversed a snowball or evened the odds. In a 12 vs 12 scenario, your time isn't rewarded. You only affected 8% of the enemy team, and you haven't changed anything. Player agency in 12 vs 12 is far too dependent on inherent trust or coordination with random internet strangers. Accomplishing any of your ideas or tactics requires an acceptance from too many other players on your team. You think that laser designating mechs for the players using LRMs would be easy, but half the time they won't even notice. Your personal contributions and ability to affect a fight are often nearly worthless in 12 vs 12. Here's a list of creative ideas you can carry out in a 4 vs 4 situation. Sneak behind a mech and backstab them. Leg a mech from range with long-range weapons. Ambush a mech. Distract the enemy team by drawing fire and surviving. Overheat a mech with flamers so a teammate can attempt a cockpit shot. Barrage a mech with LRMs, then disable their weapons with critical shots from a light mech with machine guns. I need to admit something. I'm censoring the clips here. Every one of these clips ended unceremoniously and with little reward, celebration, or even any match influence. I put a lot of time and effort into carrying out these ideas, and they were all ultimately ruined because of the 12 vs 12 format. The machine gun footage was, in retrospect, pretty successful. A fast light mech that can get in, spam critical shots, and get out is pretty effective. I was able to do it twice, but at the end, I was the only player alive. There's no possible way to continue influencing the match here. There were still 6 other players, nowhere to run, and no way to make a comeback. This overheating trick would never really work in a 12 vs 12. There's too much going on for any random player to read my intent and capitalize on the assist I made. I overheated for nothing. I was actually able to draw the enemy's fire here, and although I thought my speed and fresh armor would be enough to withstand the return fire, it clearly wasn't. I thought I was distracting 2 assault mechs. Turns out there were 3 other mechs nearby, and 2 of them were also assault mechs. Even if you're not being punished by a full team of 12, the 12 vs 12 format means that there are usually 3 to 5 assault mechs on a team. That means when you're lucky and you only get punished by 4 of the 12 enemy players, you could still end up facing the equivalent punishment of much more. Here, I thought I would pop out, ambush, and take off the right side of that Mad Cat and retreat. I thought I was only ambushing 2 to 3 mechs. Clearly I wasn't. I was pretty proud of this fight. I won the duel against the Piranha, having exploited his leg damage, but there was another mech, the Locust I legged from range earlier. I almost won this 1 vs 2, but even a crippled 20-ton light mech, the lightest mech in the game, was just too much for me. This was a golden triangle fight, memorable and recitable, but even the safe tactic of legging 1 mech from range to then maybe secure the kill is risky. There's always going to be another player to interrupt your plans. This backstab attempt is the epitome of 12 vs 12 punishment. Had the other team only been 4 players, I would have succeeded in my hit and run. Had the other team only have been 8 players too, I might have succeeded here, although with lots of damage. But attempting to do anything with a player count this high is never rewarding. Trying new things is punished in 12 vs 12, and there's also not a lot of room to try those things in the first place. The maps get packed. The mathematical space and time limitations involved with 12 vs 12, and the constant reactive gameplay it produces, could be solved through separated spawns, more power positions, and bigger maps in general. As it is, most maps are either relatively small, have concentrated spawns, or just a single power position that both teams fight over. Many of the maps hold all 3 of these faults. The maps do attempt to separate spawns. Players are organized into 3 lances of 4 players. They spawn in separate groups, and the idea is that the lances will spread out and fight other lances before joining another larger fight. That doesn't happen. Players immediately group up into a death ball. The death ball itself is a result of 3 things. The spawn positions, which are close, the map sizes, which aren't big enough to substantially separate the spawns, and the high time to kill factor. Making your 1 vs 1 a 2 vs 1 is your best tactic in MechWarrior. It's right here in the first Battletech book published, Decision at Thunder Rift. Traditional military tactical thought holds that the best way to fight a mech is to send in another mech, preferably one bigger, stronger, and more heavily armed. This logic remains true in MechWarrior games. There are no clean duels in MechWarrior. Both of you are going to experience some kind of loss, but this logic escalates all the way up to 12 vs 12 groupings. At most, a fast, light, or medium mech will separate, but only because they can use their speed to rejoin the group. A 12-player match size where spawns are all close will produce a 12-player deathball every time. The other team too is going to deathball because the best counter to a mass of 12 mechs is your own mass of 12 mechs. But now, you're at risk of being exposed to the other 12 mechs. If you run into one enemy, you're more than likely going to be running into the rest of them and their deathball. So now you have to hide your deathball, and you do that by hill hugging. By hill, I mean whatever the central power position is on the map. Almost every MechWarrior Online map features just one central power position. Frozen City, Crimson Straits, Canyon Network, River City, Mining Collective, Viridian Bog, HPG Manifold, etc., etc. The death ball won't hill hug on top of the hill, you're just exposed up there. The death balls are usually always behind the hill. Tactically, it's in your best interest to wait for them to approach you. It's in your best interest to force them to expose themselves to you. But because the objective modes don't matter, both Deathball's goal is to kill the other mechs, so both teams will sit and wait. That is, of course, until someone gets bored, and then they start peeking and punishing. Or peeking and receiving punishment. In a 4 versus 4 scenario, the punishment for peeking is capped to only 4 mechs at most shooting at you. It's going to punish you, but it's not always going to outright obliterate you from the map. This punishment usually happens to 2 types of players on the team. There's the light mech just trying to play their role, scouting, LRM designating, or backstabbing, and the non-light mech who gets bored, peeks, and is deleted. That deletion then opens up your team to the next stage from the enemy team, the NASCAR loop. This is MechWarrior Online's snowballing effect. It's affectionately called NASCAR because teams often rotate around the central hill feature, either chasing the team that lost the opening trades, or vice versa.
Target acquired.
Okay guys, we're NASCARing, don't be left
New
behind.
target acquired.
Losing Foxtrot 7.
The NASCAR is rarely reversed. You, the single player, cannot substantially reverse or influence the snowball, especially of this size. You're often reliant on your teammates doing it with you. You're reliant on compliance from randoms who might not even have VoIP turned on. Losing a snowball feels bad. You feel like you had all of your player agency removed. It feels like standing in front of a firing squad, just waiting for the snowball to take you so that you can just start the next match. Winning a snowball doesn't always feel good either. When it's clear you're winning the snowball, there's usually a mad dash to capitalize and inflate your C-Bell and XP earnings. Sometimes you miss out, and either your earnings aren't really any better if you lost, or you just feel like you didn't really play any gameplay. You will experience this NASCAR chase countless times. It in itself isn't a terrible player experience. Trust me, it's not good. But the problem is that it's the only player experience, regardless of the game mode or objective. Normally, a game mode is introduced to mix up player experiences. An objective can put players in new parts of the map or provide avenues for creativity outside of a pure PvP fight. In MechWarrior Online's Quick Play, there are 5 game modes. The first one is Skirmish. This is what everyone wanted but had to ask the developers for. You win by killing them, or having more kills than them at the timer end. The former happens 99% of the time. The second game mode is Assault. This is the game mode everyone had at the start of the game's launch, and why everyone asked for Skirmish. Each team has a capturable base. Often, a light mech would sneak in and capture the base before any real fighting started. That's because everyone had to deathball. Nobody sat behind and played defense with the base. The only time capturing the base is considered is when you've wiped out all but one opposing player, and you don't feel like finding them. Assault matches play like skirmish matches 99% of the time otherwise. The third game mode is Domination. It's really just King of the Hill. The same central power position hill that the deathballs are going to be hugging is almost always the capturable point, so matches don't play any differently than skirmish. The only thing the capture point does is end the match when your team doesn't want to scramble around looking for the last enemy player. The fourth game mode is Incursion. Think Team Fortress 2's 2 Fort, but bad. It's ultimately the same as Assault, but this time the bases have turrets and walls. It plays the same as Assault too, except in that rare instance you want a cap instead of looking for that last light mech, there's some turrets around to bother you. It really just prolongs the end of a match. The fifth game mode is Escort. I don't even think it's in rotation anymore. It was bad. I'm not even going to write anything about how broken and abusable it was. Don't even think about it. The sixth game mode is Conquest. Conquest is the light at the end of the tunnel for me. It's the only game mode that mixes things up. It's the only game mode that can bring fights to different parts of the map and also break up the deathball occasionally. There are 5 capturable points in the map, and the first team to reach 750 resource points wins. A team losing the snowball can sneakily capture the points and reverse it. Especially after each team is whittled down to somewhere between 4 versus 4 or 8 versus 8, Conquest shines because it pulls players away from one another and into different parts of the map. Conquest produces more golden triangle situations because it breaks up the death ball, incentivizes players to leave the hill, and disrupts the NASCAR effect. There are, though, plenty of times that this game mode plays out just like Skirmish, but Conquest brings hope. Conquest with respawn, repairs, larger maps, and maybe a higher point limit is what MechWarrior Online needs. God knows it's what faction play needs. But until then, 83% of the game modes produce the same player experience. The issues imposed by a 12 versus 12 format aren't mitigated by the map design, and the gameplay loops incited by the map designs are not influenced by the objective design, save for the occasional Conquest match. Skirmish is both the core player experience but also functionally the only player experience. The developers have had 8+ years to try new things and bring new player experiences to the table, but we're still stuck with the same one from the closed beta, and that player experience isn't always great. A I'm going to let this clip play out because I think it's a really good example of what Conquest can bring to MechWarrior Online. The blue team lost the fight, but they ended up winning the match. The blue team was able to run out the clock and force the enemy team to focus on fighting them instead of capping the rest of the points. By the time that the blue team had lost, the enemy team was either too damaged, too slow, or just too late to cap the rest of the points and lost the match accordingly. This Conquest match produced a fight that was roughly 4 versus 4, afforded everyone plenty of time and space to work with, and was largely influenced by the objective. It was a golden triangle fight. The match produced really good combat, but what's more important is that it also produced an interesting player experience. A player experience that largely differs from the run-of-the-mill skirmish kill-or-be-killed experience, and that's important in MechWarrior Online. Variety is desperately needed in MechWarrior Online. The player experience bell curve should look like this: fair and near fights at the top, and egregiously unfair fights at the ends, more rarely. But that's not how it happens. It's actually almost an inverse bell curve where lots of egregiously overmatched fights happen more often than the fun golden triangle fights. Maybe the developers have the player statistics to counter this, but the impression I have after 8+ years since the closed beta isn't favorable. The golden triangle fights are what prompt me to start MechWarrior Online again, but the overmatched fights, and the perception I hold that they happen too often, are what make me rage quit. Losing in a video game doesn't have to feel terrible. Being a player on a losing team doesn't have to remove your player agency completely. Titanfall does a much better job of keeping the losing players engaged. Instead of just waiting for death, the player can try to escape. You have to run away and jump onto a transport before getting fragged yourself, or before the enemy team can destroy the transport. It's fun for the winning team too, as they can chase down the enemy players or try to intercept the transport. What's frustrating here is that MechWarrior Online has all the assets to do the exact same thing. There are already dropships modeled in the game, and there's nothing preventing the same mechanic from being implemented. WarThunder's air battles can make losing fun too. Sometimes you'll lose a dogfight, but have the opportunity to limp home. Trying to land a damaged plane is fun. There's a mini-game of fighting gravity, coolant temperatures, plane controls, and your own fears that you can land, repair, rearm, and maybe try again. This too could have all been implemented in MechWarrior Online. As it is, if your mech is out of ammunition or has lost all of its weapons, there's no melee or self-destruct tactic to fall back on. All you can do is spot enemies, but at this point it's redundant. The maps aren't that big and everyone's already in a big death ball. MechWarrior Online could have basic repair and rearm mechanics that would give the players an incentive to limp home and try again. Team Fortress 2 made losing funny. Running away or playing hide and seek is a comical way to play out your loss. MechWarrior Online has the mechanics to do something similar. There's shutdown mechanics and also electronics to detect shutdown mechs. But until a combination of substantial map design revisions, match size revisions, or objective design revisions are installed, we'll be stuck with the same player experience that we've had since closed beta. PGI made attempts to the maps and objectives. They made the maps bigger for 12 vs 12, and at least introduced new game modes. At minimum, these changes were a net neutral. Two large changes, though, weren't. The quirks and skills system are arguably net negative changes, especially as a new player. Trying to understand anything about the investments you make into MechWarrior Online is difficult. Quirks and skills bleed into each other's systems, and the end result, especially working with clan omnipods and full skill point trees, is incomprehensible. Let's review quirks first. Originally in Battletech, quirks were design features or flaws for the tabletop game. Some mechs could make their arms face rearward, or have stronger battle fists for melee attacks. Some were more subtle and provided bonuses to reloads or accuracy. There were negative quirks too. The Centurion had an ammunition feed problem that sometimes caused jams. Mechs with small arms couldn't or had difficulty getting up after a fall. The quirk system made its way into MechWarrior Online as a soft balancing system. At one point, its intent was to offset egregious deficiencies in mech design and geometry. The Hunchback, for example, holds its firepower in a big hunch. That big hunch is easy to pinpoint, so it received some stronger hunch quirks to offset it. Then it got out of control. Trying to navigate through all of this, especially for new players, is exceedingly difficult. Lots of Inner Sphere mechs get the whole mech armor or structure bonuses, which is really just a hard balancing tool now. Entire weapon systems too are sometimes only viable with the right quirks. The AC-10 fires too slowly to justify face tanking like the UAC-5. but too fast to fire, torso twist, and fire again like the AC-20. It's only when you find a mech with a 20 to 25% cooldown bonus that the AC-10 becomes interesting again. Every weapon system should be viable without relying on quirks. The worst part is that the quirks list presented here isn't always what's possible. The skill tree blades into the quirk system too, but it's underneath it. Here's the Cataphract 1X without skills. It receives a base 20% ballistic cooldown quirk, which is nice, but it doesn't tell the player that it can actually be a 32% quirk when you apply the skills toward it. But to apply skills toward the quirk list, you have to navigate this nightmare. And you have to revisit this nightmare for every mech. This isn't a pilot skill tree, this is a per mech skill tree. The original skill trees were much simpler. Put X time into Y mech and receive Z skill reward. They were almost always non-weapon or armor quirks. They used to be things like faster startup sequences or slightly higher torso twist or slightly higher type speeds. There were also module slots that let you pick and choose more substantial perks, seismic sensors, radar deprivation, etc. Now it's this garbage. If you want, for example, all the ballistic cooldown perks from the skill tree, you also have to grab several velocity or heat generation or other unassociated quirks. It's never this or that. Then you end up with an atrocity of a quirks list like this. And this. It's overly complicated and was, when released, a deciding factor in my decision to essentially abandon the game for a while. Other games do this. WarThunder does this. You play with a certain crew and they get better at things like reloading the cannons or estimating ranges with the rangefighter or fixing the tank. They're all things that you can already do, but slightly better. I can't even begin to describe how poorly MechWarrior Online's skill tree fails, and I wish they returned to the module selection or at least rearranged the damn trees. Good luck trying to look anything up about any of these equipment, quirks, or skill bonuses too. Because the game has been out for 8+ years and very few official publications have been made for the game, trying to look up what bonuses Targeting Computer Mark 1 provides or trying to learn how radar and spotting works is impossible. A 22.5 targeting time boost means nothing to me if I don't know what the baseline is in the first place. If in 8 years we can't get some kind of official website detailing targeting computer stats and figures, I'm not confident we can see any new feature implementation at all. Although we've seen, over time, lots of new mechs and the introduction of FedCom-era weapons, technology, and clan mechs, we haven't seen any real feature implementation. We still don't have, after 8 years, Mech Melee, Combined Arms, MechWarrior 3 style targeting computers, Mech stability and falling, crouch, repair or rearm mechanics, a real ejection sequence, inverse kinematics, or rather the return of inverse kinematics, spotlights and searchlights, different kinds of weapon variants, a customizable HUD color. That last one bothers me especially. Why can't I just change my HUD color to green? It's been 8 years. I'm pretty sure I remember reading a forum post 7 years ago about it. Every other MechWarrior HUD is green. Just give me this green. Yellow is hideous. It's disgusting. It's not even a resource-heavy implementation. Just give me a color wheel. It can't be that hard. Do something. Let's look at another free-to-play game that released around the same time, WarThunder. WarThunder began life as a World War II combat flight simulator. Then they added tanks with realistic armor physics. Now they have straight-up battleships with full naval controls. They even have matches where they all fight each other. Over the same amount of time that MechWarrior Online has been an offering, they've added new features like guided missiles, radar features, air-to-air missiles, carrier landings, straight-up helicopters, several engine updates, several visual updates, constant audio updates. Remember, this was originally a World War II dogfighting game. Now you can launch passive radar-guided missiles from an F-4 Phantom or fire broadsides from one of many battleships. And here's the kicker. The only thing that WarThunder really hasn't tried to implement or revise are improved game modes. but the smaller updates with new sounds, visuals, feature implementations, and back-end options are what keeping me coming back. So if a World War II dogfighting game can evolve into a cross-platform, multi-generational war machine game over the same time period, I think MechWarrior Online can add mech melee and a customizable HUD color wheel. At this point, I will gladly pay a nominal fee to unlock a HUD color wheel. I will gladly pay some money to change my HUD to be green. I will gladly pay $5 to listen to MechWarrior 3's Bitching Betty.
Automatic shutdown sequence initiated.
I will pay a few bucks to replace the in-game music with music from older MechWarrior games. I will pay a few bucks to import a camouflage pattern from MechWarrior 4. I will pay a few bucks to buy fun little screen animations or features for the multifunction information displays in my cockpit. I will gladly pay a few bucks to customize my MechWarrior model into a sweaty, pantless lobster. I will gladly pay a few bucks to change the sound effects of some of my weapons for nostalgia's sake. I could honestly overlook another year without substantial feature implementation if you let me drown my frustrations in some nostalgia. Sell me some rose-tinted glasses here. Some of your community champions have already done half the work for you. Go pay Shivaxi for his weapon and sound packs and then charge us for them. Or support him and give him half the proceeds. Go to the MechWarrior 5 mod authors and pay them to help expand MechWarrior Online into what it should be. At this point, do something, PGI. I can't hate MechWarrior Online. This is, again, the best MechWarrior we've had. I can't go to MechWarrior 4 and I can't go back to MechWarrior Living Legends. This is the gold standard, but the gold standard is covered in dust and it's beginning to mold. The player base has declined for several reasons. I'll not fault PGI for trying to implement things like faction play into Solaris, even though both underwhelmed and disappointed. That's another video. I will, though, fault PGI for not committing to and improving on their attempts. I'll also fault PGI for either ignoring or deliberately not attempting to implement these long list of MechWarrior Online features and cosmetic offerings over the past 8 years. The lowest hanging fruit here, the rose-tinted glasses, can buy some time to implement the more substantial improvements. Give us the color wheels and the nostalgia grabs to hold us over and generate some cash flow. Then install some assets from MechWarrior 5, things that you've already worked on, things like weapon variety, combined arms, and inverse kinematics. Those are already there. Then with the time and the cash flow you've gotten, figure out mech melee, figure out crouching, figure out internal damage statuses, figure out mech stability. Then overhaul your 12 vs 12 format, map design, and objective designs. Eventually, definitely port the game over to Unreal. I hate CryEngine. There has been, finally, a break from radio silence around MechWarrior Online from PGI. I remain skeptical. MechWarrior 5 was a technical set of improvements, but I was ultimately disappointed. This roadmap, at first glance, is promising. I remain skeptical, but we know now that PGI is at least reinvesting into MechWarrior Online. They've written directly that they're looking for solutions to faction play in Solaris, and that's essentially admitting failure of the game mode. That honesty should be recognized. Some of my issues regarding supporting publications look to be addressed in March, and that's good. The bigger challenge, though, is going to be debating with the community as a whole. This community is largely fractured. We have diehard fans who want to play the game with joysticks and stock mech loadouts. We have, on the other end, players who only build and play meta mechs and builds and who view the game as an almost competitive esport title. And we have everything and everyone, including myself, in between. The fans are passionate, but I'll be honest, I do not envy PGI's position here. At the end of all of this, if we can refocus MechWarrior Online's game modes to emphasize the smaller 4 vs 4 matches that fall into that golden triangle, we'll all be in a better spot, regardless of what else happens. But for the time being, give me those rose-tinted glasses. It's time, PGI.